Good morning. I'd like to call the Door County Board of Supervisors to order on Tuesday, May 23rd at 9 a.m. Would you please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
Present, one late.
We have 20 present, one yet to arrive. Thank you. Presentation of the agenda. Have a motion and a second by all in favor? Aye. Correspondence. 2 items of note in there, Wisconsin Historical Society and the thank you note from Wisconsin County Treasurers Association. Public comment. Ken?
Sure, so we have a number of individuals online. If you'd like to speak, you can raise your hand and you'll be provided 3 minutes. Again, so I will ask 3 times if you'd like to speak. So for the second time, is there someone who'd like to speak? And for the third time, is there anyone who'd like to speak? Again, you can raise your hand and I can recognize you. Oh, we are good to go.
Okay, anybody here?
Just to double check, is there anyone in the room who would like to speak or address the board? Okay.
Obviously no supervisor's response. Item number 8, approval of the minutes of the April 18th, 2023 County Board meeting. We have a motion and a second. Any changes, additions, deletions, corrections, grammatical remarks, or other errors? If not, by voice vote, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you. County Administrator.
Sure, so the memo is provided in the packet as far as an update on the projects. They're pretty straightforward this month in terms of the updates from last month, so I'll leave it to if there's any questions. If not, we can continue.
Any questions on his report? We're going to drop on down to special reports for the NERR presentation. Good morning.
Good morning, please. Maybe you could introduce yourselves first.
Oh,
and then-
sure. Hi,
Sure.
I'm Caitlin Olson. I'm one of the co-chairs along with Mark Foley. I'll let you introduce yourself.
I'm Mark Foley.
We're thrilled, thank you all for giving us some of your time this morning. We're thrilled to share an update on our NER work. We are, again, the co-chairs of an ad hoc committee for the city of Sturgeon Bay. I know we've been in front of you before, kind of giving updates. It's been, as a federal process, it's been a little longer than I think we all anticipated. I know some of these conversations started in 2015, 2016, it's 2023, but things are really progressing, and I know some of you have been involved as well. So just to give you a quick update, UW Green Bay is the lead state agency. They are applying for a federal program through NOAA called the National Estuarine Research Reserve. It is a federal program. There is 70% federal funding with a 30% state match through UW Green Bay. And where they are in the timeline, it's a program to help establish long-term monitoring of estuaries, and this would be for the Lake Huron, Lake Michigan basin.
The city in their comprehensive plan for 2040 also included an objective to bring more research to Sturgeon Bay and Door County. So this is a culmination of that, and the best opportunity to do that is to be associated with this NOAA program. And in 2021, the mayor appointed a committee to prepare a presentation or a case for Sturgeon Bay to be the location for the Education and Visitor Center. Now there's 2 parts to the NER. There's one, it's the research properties that they will then focus their research and stewardship and efforts of the actual NOAA programs. But then there's also going to be an Education and Visitor Center. And the mayor would very much like that to be located in Sturgeon Bay. So we've been working, for the last 2 years, and the culmination is this prospectus that makes our case that why we think it should be in Sturgeon Bay. You know, in terms of NER in general, within your packet, I would, if you haven't read it, you can review these fact sheets that were there. It's something that where we took what the NOAA program was and then provided some detail of what that may mean to Door County. So we think that it's very important and a great opportunity to address all coastal type and estuarian issues in Door County. And certainly, you know, we try to make the case in the NER that we have more shoreline, and Door County and Sturgeon Bay has had to address coastal issues for so long that it's become a part of our governance, right? And that the mayor has his vision when we were talking about this prospectus was that it's basically Sturgeon Bay Door County offers a plug and play. If you put the visitor center here, you can plug into this governance that already has been focused on coastal issues and estuary issues. You plug into a tourism industry that is focusing ecological type tourism in a greater case. You can plug into a philanthropy system and community that is very strong. You can plug into the stewardship. Look at all our environmental groups in Door County that focus on this stuff. So they get a whole set of suite of communities that will feed right into this program. You know, we feel like we're in competition with Brown County and Marinette. So, you know, the odds are, I mean, the competition is tough, but we think Door County and Sturgeon Bay is a great place for that to happen. So I don't know if there's any other questions. You know, some people, I know Vinny has been involved in the whole process of identifying the properties. We do know that the areas that they've chosen, you know, it includes Sturgeon Bay, where it's, you know, most of all of Crossroads, of the land trust properties there, and some DNR properties. That's been in the packet that they have sent to NOAA for approval, so we're waiting for that approval. We thought that the Education and Visitor Center would be addressed as early as last January, but now they're waiting until they hear back from NOAA approval of those properties. And we expect that to happen at any time. And any support that we can continue to convey to UWGB would be most appreciated. And I guess at this point, if there are any other questions of us or details or something that we could help, you know, we'd love the discussion and what you thought of it. I think it's appropriate and that kind of thing.
Questions? Vinny?
The basics of what the Education Visitor Center would be. I don't mean the details of the building, but like who provides the programming? Is it through UWGB, or is there opportunity to hire other interpreters, and is it research more or visitor education? Just a couple minutes on that. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question. So one of the functions of the visitor and the research center, obviously that research piece is really critical. And so, and I'll give a caveat that no NER facility is the same. So it's not an apples to apples comparison. It's really about it's very much state led. So it's what the state agency and the community want. NOAA is very supportive of allowing them to kind of decide. But we know that UW Green Bay has said that they want this to be the most technologically advanced. Titletown Tech is a key partner with them, so we know that that they are going to want a really kind of state-of-the-art visitor experience. We're not quite sure yet all of that will entail, but we know that visitor engagement piece will be really key. There will be someone from the UWGB employed through UWGB that will oversee the research component, and so usually that means there's one person on staff that's in charge of helping with any kind of the equipment, hiring interns, working with other folks to help coordinate research. So that could be working with the land trust, it could be helping coordinate with the ridges. It's kind of up to that person to decide what the best use of their time and efforts are in that case. And to the point, you know, I don't want to speak for UWGB and say that they would hire another person to specifically run the visitor center, but what I could see is bringing in, for instance, some of their own, utilizing their own programming through the UW system. So looking at like education, we know that hospitality is an area of interest for them, so helping to get those students up here and getting them real life experience. But for that visitor piece, envisioning opportunities not only to tell the story of the ecological system in Door County and the Green Bay watershed, but also looking at ways to feed into what the Maritime Museum is doing and what other folks in the community are doing to help tell that wider story in a more cohesive way.
Right. And I don't view it as much as, it is much as a education center for what they talk about. So they gave an example at a recent meeting that I attended, down in Florida, where they created one of a NER down there. I'm not exactly sure which one, but they put the visitor center out near the properties. You know, it's kind of out, you know, in the wild, and they got a number of visitors and so on, but there wasn't as many as they wanted. So then they built the second one right near the major highway, and now they get 30,000 visitors a year. So they're looking for exposure to convey ecological things related to estuaries to as broad a community as possible, and to use all different modalities, whether it's arts, writing, you know, taking walks and so on. So they're really looking for a broad way to communicate environmental issues that relate to estuaries and so on. So they're looking for educational groups to be able to come through, and lots of potential visitors, which I think we can all offer that in Door County, right? So that's why we think we're in a good location. And they don't have to be within one of the reserve properties. They can be outside of that. It could be anywhere within the broader ecological basis. You know, and they describe Green Bay as the world's largest freshwater estuary. So, you know, the properties that they looked at initially for including in their reserve part, you know, extended all the way from Washington Island, you know, down to Green Bay. Now they focused on basically the four, which is Southwest Green Bay, Point Sable, the Peshtigo River, and Sturgeon Bay. So, and I think they recognized a little bit, because in their first cut of what properties to reserve from an ecological perspective, Sturgeon Bay wasn't included, but then they've included that because we're the only properties that are on the east shore of Green Bay, and visitors. You know, they specifically mentioned that. So we're really looking forward that to take our best shot at having it located here. We think it would be a big thing, not only for Sturgeon Bay, but community-wide. You know, the whole booklet was produced within Door County. You know, Destination Door County helped with the design and outlay. Alessandro Ross from Washington Island was our key editor. So, you know, and it was by Laurel Hauser and Seiler and so on, helping with some of the writing on that. So,
We have another question. Todd?
Yeah, my question is, and maybe you can help remind me, has the county ever passed a resolution supporting the NER, and if not, should we?
So we do have a resolution on the books that providing support.
Okay.
In talking with the mayor and the city, depending on the timing, that's why they wanted to make a presentation in terms of an update. They might be requesting that we pass a secondary resolution, again, providing support, just because it's been so long in between and there's been so many different moving parts. So the idea was to get a presentation today, have you understand and ask questions, and then depending on the timing between what the group's working on and the mayor, we'd have, I guess, one available, whether it be next month or the following month. We'd rely on your expertise on when the best timing is, but that's would be probably the goal.
Anybody else? No other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Any business and updates? We will move to our resolutions. Resolution 2023-39, appointments to County Board Subunits, Board of Adjustments. David?
I'll make a motion to approve resolution 2023-39, the appointments to the Board of Adjustment. Nominees are Bob Ryan, Cheryl Mick, and Jeffrey Schmick-Pepper. The resumes are included in the packet for your approval. Thank you.
Any questions? If not, by voice vote, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Resolution 2023-40, acceptance of Next Generation 9/11 grant, Door County Emergency Management and Communications. Joel?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to make a motion to approve Resolution 2023-40, acceptance of the Next Generation 911 grant for Door County Emergency Management and Communications. Pretty self-explanatory as written in the resolution. It's going to be used for upgrading and modernization of the 911 call center.
Any questions? We will go to the voter board. That's passed by a majority vote of 21 yes, 0 no. Thank you. Resolution 2023-41, approval of the ambulance services agreement, interfacility transports. Joel?
Thank you, sir. I also like to make a motion to approve this resolution, 2023-41, approval of ambulance service agreements, interfacility transports with the hospital in the county. Any further questions could probably be directed towards Aaron if he's here, or the administrator for details.
Any questions? Okay, no questions. We will go to the voter board. That's passed a majority vote, 20 yes, 1 no. Thank you. Thanks for everyone's hard work. Thanks for the hospital's hard work. Thanks for emergency services hard work and our administration hard work. Everybody did a great job getting this done, so thank you.
Here's one more. The next one's related to it as well.
Okay. Resolution 2023-42, supplement appropriations for DCS to ramp up for interfacility transfers. David or Joel?
Motion to approve Resolution 2023-42 to supplement the appropriations for, it's for the startup of the program for the interfacility transports, being able to hire a billing specialist and captain immediately to ramp up for the program. And we need $25,000, 50% of the estimated cost, and the hospital is providing the balance.
Okay. Any questions? We will go to the voter board.
2/3 on this one.
I've just been reminded this requires a 2/3 vote, non-budgeted. That's passed by 2/3 votes of 20 yes, 1 no. Thank you. Resolution 2023-43, request State of Wisconsin to use a portion of the 2023 budgetary surplus for the maintenance, repair, and replacement of the county trunk highway system. Roy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to approve resolution number 2023-43.
Motion and a second. Any questions or any other explanation?
Mr. Chair,
It's on.
It's
just a
on.
couple comments. We're talking about the general transportation aid to be increased and for our roads, and it looks like we're going to get that according to our Assemblyman Joel Kitchens on the radio last week. But the main one is when you go down to line 22, we're talking about the local road improvement program, the supplemental. That's a special program that comes out every 2 years that the state appropriates money for, and that's a 70% state funded, 30% locally funded. And we have a couple of projects that are really important. One is our County Road E, the causeway. We'll have to take a look at that pretty quickly. And our highway commissioner is looking at that to put that as a supplemental project, and that's going to be a multi-million-dollar project. So that's very important, that supplemental be increased for our benefit in Door County.
Any questions? By voice vote, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Resolution 2023-44, U.S. Forest Service Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, Great for Woody Species Inventory. Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll make a motion to adopt Resolution 2023-44, U.S. Forest Service Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, grant for woody species inventory.
Any questions? Any other comments or explanations required? Alexis?
Sorry, thank you. I was just curious on this one, and I see the directors in the back, so I felt comfortable asking. This is just for monitoring, but not removal. Is there, once we know where it is there additional grant awards, or would the county be responsible then for managing what we find out there? I mean, both, but financially, I guess specifically.
Hi, all.
Good morning.
I am Sam Cohen. I'm the person who applied for this grant in our soil and water department. This grant is working in our state natural areas with our nonprofit partners, and it is to inventory woody invasives first and then apply for a much larger fund. Sustain Our Great Lakes has funding available for areas that are part of this GLRI, but they first have to be adopted into the GLRI first. If that makes sense.
Any other questions? We will go to the voter board. That's passed on vote of 21 yes, 0 no. Thank you. Resolution 2023-45, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Plum Island and Detroit Island Invasive Species Control. Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll make a motion to adopt Resolution 2023-45, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Plum Island and Detroit Island Invasive Species Control.
We have a motion and a second. Any questions? We will go to the voter board. That's passed by a majority vote of 21 yes, 0 no. Resolution 2023-46, Modernize and Improve Wisconsin's Farmland Preservation Program. Mr. Fisher.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. I'll make a motion we adopt Resolution 2023-46, modernize and improve the Wisconsin Farmland Preservation Program. And Greg is back here if anybody needs a little longer explanation here. If anybody needs one, they can ask Greg.
Can you give us a brief overview?
Good morning, everybody. So this is a budget priority, the second budget priority for our state, Wisconsin Land and Water Conservation Association. And so many of the other counties have much more participants than we have, but to give you a perspective on this, because you can see the two whereas here where about 50% have dropped out. In Door County, we had about 50 participants back in our heyday, and we're down to about 28 now. So this is a top priority. What's happening is that the farmland tax credits that they're receiving are not enough to cover the best management practices that they're required to implement on their farms. So with the statewide standards of prohibition, some of these farmers are dropping out because it just doesn't pay for them. That's the bottom line.
Any other questions for Greg? If not by voice vote, all in favor?
Sorry.
Aye. I'm sorry, was there a question? Joel? I'm sorry, Dave. Yeah.
If property had to be in an exclusive ag zoning to participate?
Now it does,
Now it
unless
does,
you get
okay.
unless you get a farmland enterprise area. Right now, Claybanks is the only area zone for farmland.
Okay.
But in the past, others could have signed up.
Any other questions? All right, just to verify, by voice vote, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Resolution 2023-47, provide $18.7 million in stable core funding support for County Conservation Department staffing. Mr. Fisher.
To adopt Resolution 2023-47.
A motion and a second. Any questions? Any explanation?
Sure. A couple months ago, the governor's budget didn't have 18.7 million in it for conservation staffing, but it was a good number that was in there. A lot of that has since been stripped, and then last week, our association, I should back up a little bit. This is the number one budget priority for our association, and last week, our executive director stated that we should send out an email to the Joint Finance Committee to ask for 13.9 million for staffing. This is a statutorily required staffing amount. 100% for the first position, 70% for the second, and 50% for the third and following positions. So that ask right now is 18.7 million to fulfill that statutory requirement through DADCAP and ENR and other sources. So right now, the Joint Finance Committee, I believe, approved a lesser amount than what we currently have for 23, so it's around that 11 million point for 24 and 25. But again, it falls far short. The Joint Finance Committee also realized and was promising our association that it was going to increase by some amount, but for some reason it did not. But they're saying that in some of the emails that we've seen that they're going to correct that. Now I don't know if that means going back to the 13 or if it's going to be something higher. So I do know that Winnebago County has also passed this. I'm sure other counties are going to be passing the same resolution. And, yeah, that's where we're at.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions before we take a vote? If not by voice vote, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Resolution 2023-48, approval of the groundwater sampling protocol and preliminary screening contract. Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll make a motion to adopt Resolution 2023-48, approval of groundwater sampling protocol and preliminary screening contract.
Overview?
Okay, so this has been in the works for a couple years now, and again, it's to explore some of the emerging contaminants here in private drinking water in Door County. The ARPA funds that we're utilizing for this, the budgeted amount, I believe, is about $409,000 as of now. April 28th, we opened up the proposals. We had 7 proposals, so very good participation for firms that want to participate. Those proposals ranged from $268,000 up to about $674,000. And again, I guess GZA was the selected firm to do this project, the 4-year project. They came in at $357,700, and they scored a perfect score. If you look at the instructions and specifications, they had a perfect score on their proposals. So very qualified. They've done several, I think it was 8 of these types of projects in the past. So happy to have GZA do this work for us, and our committee has supported it as well.
Any questions? You?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Greg, I have a couple questions, so please bear with me. Number one, how does this differ from the voluntary well testing, programs that's been going on for the last few years? That is my first one. Number two, are the tests collected by the contractor, and are they going to those same sites over that 4-year period? That's my second one. And is this a way that we can target specific areas in the county where we know there's been concerns about, groundwater and safety of wells, like say a watershed in Southern Door County?
Sure. So the first thing, we're not necessarily going to go to the same exact wells that we did in the past, but we could. Certainly we're going to advertise and look for participants on this. In the future, are we going to target some areas? Probably, depending on what we find in the first year. But as far as what we've been testing for in the past, it's primarily been bacteria, nitrates, arsenic, and then last summer we did that pesticide analysis. So we're going to look at some of those very same things, but we're also going to look at the PFAS, obviously, microplastics, the PAHs, which are your pavement sealants, the coal tar sealants. Let's see, there's a couple other things, pharmaceuticals. So we're looking at those emerging contaminants. But I think the first round this year, I think we're targeting 120 wells to do the initial screening. And at the think it's gonna be like one sample for every, kind of looking back there, 4 square miles, I think, is what the, if I remember correctly.
Thank you.
Alexis?
Thank you. So I have a couple questions. The 120 wells, I assume, are voluntary, and they understand all the suite of things that you're going to be
Correct.
sampling for, and the implications of if you find it, then what? And do we know if we find it, then what?
Good
Like,
question.
if you're looking for
Good
it and you
question.
find it, you're statutorily obligated to deal with it.
Right.
I have a problem with this, with like expanding it to your.
So I
list
know
of
they have an
emerging
online
contaminants.
form for sign up, and it is voluntary. Sean and I have been talking a number of legal issues on this, but there is a community response on the DNR, what we can do when a sample does test positive, whether it's private or public. So the public sector is going to be going through this very same process too, I assume. Maybe not to this detail, but part of it is when the landowner gets that analysis, what it says on the DNR document is that they have they received the results. Well owners are not obligated to share these results, but of course they're encouraged to. Because we all know in Door County that the groundwater under your house is going to be shared by your neighbors, and we also know that it travels very quickly.
But
So
that's if they're sampling for themselves. We're doing this sampling. So as a,
it falls into the same category.
okay.
So again, the DNR has been sending out a lot of resources and emails, and I know it was in our packet for the LCC. I don't think it was in the packet for the county board. But this is an excellent document that kind of explains what communities can do as we're going through this process.
I just want to be really clear that when you find it, the homeowner is responsible. And if they don't want to do anything about it, that's up to them. But some people are going to have a hard time not doing anything about it because we don't have state standards yet. EPA is working on standards. So if you do, I mean, I deal with this day in and day out, so I'm in the weeds, I understand that, but I have a hard time with this one, I'm sorry. Not to say that we shouldn't be sampling and people shouldn't know what's in their water, and that the DNR is doing a lot to put out these resources and to help with this process. The timing of it though, and our involvement in pushing this and telling people that they should sample, and then we need to really understand what the implications of finding something are going to be because it's expensive. Thank you.
Bob?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Will any public wells be sampled as part of this?
We're not, no.
Vinnie? Wait.
The same
Have
list.
the conversation on a mic. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. Since it was brought up by Supervisor Peter, it just deepens my question. So, we have a list of contaminants that GZA is going to do for this voluntary private testing. Is that same list being tested in public wells too? The public? Yeah. Okay. So that's fine.
Yeah, if you want me to answer, I know the PFAS schedule is coming out for public wells. Whether they're sampling from this other stuff or what the other requirements are, I don't know.
Vinnie?
I'm also having a little bit of issue with this. I'm very much for sampling wells and finding out what's in the water, but without the standards set, and then also it's a lot of money to spend if someone's not obligated to share the results. So let's say all 120 wells decide not to share their results, then we spent $350,000 and we have no results. So I want to respect the landowner's right to not share their results, but it's hard to invest that much in the data collection, not even knowing if we'll have 10 results or 110, because we don't know if they'll share the results. It depends on what they are. So I don't know a way around that. If you could speak to that, it seems like it's probably a problem with well testing across the whole state and country, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in regards to the PFAS and some of the other emerging contaminants, this is our first go at this. And, it's one of the reasons why we're want to hire GZAs, because they've had this experience, 8 times over, in their proposals. So they know how to handle these situations. They know how to, if we're going to have a positive result, conferring with the DNR, if there's something that's over the limits out there, I can't say if they're going to say, well, it came from address, XYZ. But this area needs to be further studied because there's an issue. And then, it's one of those things where we just got to reduce that exposure level. At least the landowner knows, hey, stop drinking your water, get some clean water to drink. Let's get a new system or treat it, and let's remediate the problem. But to put our heads in the sand right now, I think is just wrong.
What is the treatment for PFAS? Like, how would a landowner treat that in their water system? River?
There's three that I saw on a webinar. There's like an ion exchange, there's a charcoal treatment, and then I think there's a reverse osmosis.
Okay.
But more treatments are coming on, becoming aware every day. So it's once we find if there's a source, we need to address it. And other communities are going through this very same process right now, or are a couple steps ahead of us.
And is there any thought of, I mean, I know drilling wells is expensive, but I mean, is there any test wells we would consider doing that are on county property? Or if we're just looking for general, because 120, I don't know what a broad range of the whole groundwater system will get from that anyway. I just wonder if there's some liability the county could take on that versus like asking the private landowner to do it and then pay for it and figure out how to put a system in, or I don't know, just a thought.
We certainly do have monitoring wells that the county hasn't been involved with other projects. There's three wells at Dunes Lake, but part of it is looking at what those well depths are at. So again, part of the study is going to be looking at that upper aquifer where these contaminants are most likely to be found. So some of our test wells are, below the Makokata Shale, which are very unlikely to see this. So, and again, GZA addresses this very situation in their proposal. So Ken Bradbury is one of their partners in this, and he's done dozens of studies up here, so he's well aware of the parameters that we're dealing with.
Last part of that question is so that we would get some data, even if the landowner said they don't want to share their result, it just would be shared anyway, but not their location of the sample test, like down to the house. Is that kind of how they handle it?
I believe so.
Okay.
That could be
Thank you.
100% sure, so.
I have a question going along with the data collection piece. So who actually is gonna get that information? Is the state gonna get that information? I mean, the homeowner, yes. Does the state get it? I mean, who gets access to the information even though it may not be, quote, publicly dispersed?
And I'm not sure if they're going through the state lab of hygiene. And I guess, I'm not, I don't know if we can ask.
You could ask them.
Yeah. Jim, would you like to come up here? Do you have that answered? Hate to fumble through this one.
Good morning.
So, my name is Jim Drought. I'm a hydrogeologist. Good name for a hydrogeologist as well. Also, my family's been a resident of Door County, the tip of the thumb, since 1965, so it's really great to be here. And lots of great questions today, and for those of you that have been asking questions, we'd love to have you as part of our committee, our advisory committee as well. So I just want to throw that out. I wanted to address the question about notification. Part of our public outreach will be asking for volunteers to participate in this program, and we will be asking them through various public platforms about if we can access their well and what we'd be sampling for. And as part of that, we would be talking about what are we going to do with the data, and will that remain private or will that go into some sort of a platform? So that will be discussed up front. I can tell you though, a lot of the contaminants that Greg was mentioning that we'll be sampling for do not have standards yet. Even PFAS that you've been hearing a lot about, the forever chemicals, there are proposed standards, but there's nothing that's on the books yet, but they're coming. The microplastics, the pharmaceuticals, there's a lot of those compounds that there are not standards yet. But one of the things I think that's real important to identify is, particularly with the suite of emerging contaminants, is that if it's found in a private property, it may not be emanating from that property. It could be migrating to that property from another source. And part of our investigation will be determining where that source might be. Could it be a former manufacturing facility or a agricultural facility or something? Over the weekend, I read The Advocate, and there was a refrigerator manufacturing facility in Sister Bay that operated until 1966 and closed. They made these walk-in coolers. And that was when a lot of these emerging contaminants were used. So that's a potential source. But I would think most of the contaminants are gone right now. So I think part of the investigation will be evaluating, what would be the potential source. And then the last thing I wanted to comment about is if we do find something that is above a standard, particularly with PFAS, what do we do with that data? And I can give you an example of one right now in a community called Stella, which is just east of Rhinelander. And as part of a Department of Natural Resources sponsored sampling program, a series of residential areas in the middle of nowhere, wells in the middle of nowhere were sampled, and they found very elevated levels of PFAS over the course of the last year. And the question becomes, where is it coming from? But those individual wells that were sampled were not identified as responsible for investigation or remediation. But that data was conveyed to the department, so the Department of Natural Resources could then look at that area and say, okay, where do we think that source is? And it's surrounded by agricultural fields, and there's some thought that maybe there was biosolid applications to the fields that could be perhaps resulting from that. But we're going to be very, very transparent working with Greg and his staff on the public outreach and what we want to do with the data, just to really get a good handle on groundwater quality, because so much of most of the groundwater that's consumed in Door County comes from domestic supply wells as opposed to drinking water supply or public water supply systems. And is there anything that we should be doing? And Greg also mentioned some of the treatment systems. There are very affordable treatment systems that Greg mentioned for domestic supply wells that are already in place in other parts of the state that people can use as well. So hopefully that answers some of your questions. If there's anything else, I'd be happy to address those as well.
Alexis?
Thank you. I'm glad you're here. Thank you for being here for this. I just have a few questions, and please bear with me. So when you're doing this outreach, and I guess my question is part of your outreach going to be, if we find these things, who's responsible for paying for the 10 grand in bottled water a month?
I'm not sure we've really thought about that yet, but I think that's a great question. I think we need to, we have to look at that. But the question becomes, it's beneficial to know what the quality of that data is, right? And then, and if it's above a standard,
which we don't have,
which we may or may not have, what do we do with it? Yeah. So.
My other question then is, who is going, so you've been involved with a lot of these. Can you give us an idea of how much these source investigations have cost you in other communities?
Okay. Well, I tell you, we've done a lot of work in the Central Sands area of Wisconsin, which is 80 miles north and south, 50 miles east and west, where most of the agricultural work, or most of the agricultural activities take place in Wisconsin. And that's a big sandbox. It's a huge sandbox. And we've done water quality and water quantity investigation there, and mostly for nitrates, because that's an area that has been extensively farmed since the 1960s, when high-capacity wells came online. Before that, we didn't have high-capacity wells, and they came online, and that area opened up for agriculture. So we've done a lot of work there, and there's a lot of areas that have very elevated levels of nitrates there. And what we've done is we've done area-wide, in fact, even township area level investigations to evaluate the extents there. And, we've spent, or our clients have spent, hundreds of thousands of dollars doing that investigation once we had an idea of how high the nitrates were.
And just to be clear, your clients would be municipalities, local
In that case, it was industrial farms.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, so you, in your proposals, I heard you scored 100%, so I'm assuming that do you have any examples of where you've explored emerging contaminants specifically, not
Yeah,
just
yeah,
nitrates?
yeah. So we've done a lot of emergent contaminant work. We've done some extensive work on PFAS, specifically with here in Wisconsin and also in Michigan at tannery sites. So the PFAS were applied as a water repellent. You're probably aware of that. You probably put it on your leather boots at one point in time, or your clothing or whatever. And so a lot of footwear that were produced by tanneries were applied with that. And so those are areas where there's a really high area. The biggest area, ground zero for PFAS, is Peshtigo. You're probably aware of that, and what's going on with JCI in form of Tyco, and
Yeah,
the
so
firefighting foam.
have you been involved in those? And again, trying to get at how much are your local municipalities, your clients paying for these source investigations where you don't have a JCI or Tyco that you can point to? Because Door County doesn't have a JCI or Tyco that I'm aware of.
Right, right, yeah. So a number of our projects, we have done the emergency contaminants where we're working for a public entity. And more often than not, you know, if we find something, getting back to my comment earlier, is to try to identify a source. And then if we can identify a source, that source ultimately will become, in the eyes of the Department of Natural Resources, the responsible party that's responsible for the investigation and remediation of that work. So simply because something's found doesn't mean that whatever property it's found on, they're responsible for the investigation remediation. If it's emanating from another source and we're able to help find that party will then become the responsible party. And that's what triggers the notification under the state statute, which is 292.11.
Yes, correct. But to get to the source identification, there's going to be a cost involved. And then in order to get that person to say, oh yeah, I am responsible for a multi-million-dollar cleanup as they're finding out Marinette Peshtigo, it's not a cakewalk. So
Yeah.
Sean, you're going to have job security if we go down this road for sure. I think that's my questions for now. Respectfully, again, I don't disagree with people knowing what's in their water. I'm having a hard time with the county's role specifically in this project. So thank you.
Vinnie?
I have one last one, which is about, is there a schedule put out for when public water supplies will be tested for these as the standards are being established? I'm just curious on maybe a county's role would be investing in the source or helping with source identification versus sampling a lot of, or not even that many private wells. 120 isn't many out of the total in the whole county. So I just looking at that angle, not to completely end your project idea, but just wondering about is there a way to, do we know that? Is there some sampling that's already going to be happening of public water supplies that would maybe give us some of this information in the county?
Yes, and it's already underway. So it's based on the population size for the community. So all municipal wells are required to be sampled for a suite of analytes on a biannual basis. The PFAS has been added to that in the last year or so, and the sampling frequency is based on the size of the community. So, I was just looking at one this last week in Bloomer, which is in Chippewa County, and that was sampled, and it was not detected for wells. But there are a number of communities that there have been low levels of PFAS that have been found in them. You've probably seen them in the paper, Wausau, Madison.
Has Door County been sampled, or are there results from Door County?
I talked to Jeff Hoffman from SBU, Sturgeon Bay Utilities, last week or the week before, so he's aware of this study, and they are starting their sampling of the groundwater soon. And that's this quarter, I think he said. But as far as the biosolids and the discharge, I think that's coming up later in the year, or I think it's fourth quarter. I said they're so if they're it's in the works.
Thank you.
David?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the information. Being a person that has his own private well, I've drank water all my life, my ancestors before me. I think it's important to recognize that the potential for some of this pollution, as you said, can come from off-site. I think I'm doing everything right in my place, of course, but we need to know where maybe pharmaceuticals are coming from. Are they coming from the ag industry? Are they coming from the treatment plants in these municipalities? Where is that waste going, and what might be in our groundwater? I think for a long time I've thought it's important to not just look at phosphates and nitrates, that there's a lot more to the pollution that's potentially there in our water. So I think it's a good program that the county needs to do.
Todd?
Yeah, just a couple quick questions here. Are new private wells required to do any type of testing? Is there any standard now that requires them to look at these emergents, or is it just test for good water and you're good to go? Nobody knows?
The new domestic supply wells, if you were to build a house, or I was to build a house, would be required to be tested for fecal coliform, and that's it. And if it's in an area that might be sensitive, the well driller might say, I would suggest we test for this as well.
There's no requirement, so.
No
Okay.
requirements.
And then you said that the standards have been, there's emerging standards, or there's been standards that have been submitted for these emerging contaminants?
Yeah, so there's a federal standard for PFAS right now of 70 parts per trillion. So when I started my career, way back when, we measured concentrations in parts per million. Then we started measuring concentrations in parts per billion because instruments got more sophisticated. Now the health advisory said we have to measure these emerging contaminants in parts per trillion or nanograms per liter. And there was a federal level. There are proposed state levels for 4 different isomers of or types of PFAS that are as low as 4 parts per trillion. But they're proposed right now, and likely they will be promulgated in the next year or so, but there's officially nothing on the books right now. But we're looking at is that is likely the standard, and the reason that 4 was picked was that's that level of instrumentation that a laboratory can reliably test.
So it's not like we're not going to be bouncing it against something. There is a standard that's proposed, and obviously that's what this would be bounced against if this does get approved. What's our county history been as far as sharing the data? Has it been fairly good, or do we have a concern that the data won't be shared?
I think it's been very good, at least for the spring and fall testing.
Yeah.
And typically what we do is we ask them if we can share it as a geography. There's a dot on the map. You can't see what the address is.
Yeah.
So, and that's on the website. You can see all those
Okay, that's good.
locations.
So I appreciate all the knowledge we have in this county board as it relates to groundwater and DNR regulations, and I appreciate all the comments that came on this, but I'm with David. I think, if it's my well, I would rather know, regardless if there's a standard that's right or not, and those types of things. So I think this is a pretty good use of money here.
Thank you, Todd. Jeff?
Yeah, I think Alexis asked this question a couple times. I'm not sure if she got an answer or not, but if I sign up and you come to my house, is someone going to be sitting there saying, Jeff, if you have this is the remediation, this is the cost?
Yeah, so Jeff, that's a great question, and if I didn't answer that with Alexis before, I apologize for that, but I think the answer is yes. We'll share the results, and we'll interpret those results, and we'll talk about what are the next steps. And so those next steps might be another round of sampling to confirm it. It might be looking at getting bottled water, or it might be looking at treatment technologies. And I can't say this is that, and you're probably all aware of this, is that the aquifer that Greg mentioned earlier here in Door County is very dynamic. And so I could sample Lexus as well today, and it might have a nitrate level of 15, and then resample it a month later, and it can have a nitrate standard of 30. It's very, very, very variable. And we see that influence even more pronounced on the coastal areas where, depending on the pumping, we could be getting signatures that are more representative of the Bay or of Lake Michigan. And as part of our ANI analysis, we'll be able to determine that. So, Jeff, I think your question is a good one, and that's part of the outreach that we're going to have to promote. And we're just getting started in this project right now. And one of the things we will talk about with Greg is, should we have a public informational meeting or a series of public informational meetings to answer these questions to residents before they get involved and ask the what ifs and what we find. So we want to be completely transparent. And then one last thing I just wanted to mention that Greg mentioned is that there is a well viewer that is online with UW Stevens Point. They collect statewide data, and I'm most familiar with, we're most familiar with regard to nitrates. But if, Jeff, you had a well that was in that program and it was submitted to UW Stevens Point, your well would be representative of a section. It would not represent a dot with a location of your address. It would be a section. So it's a very coarse viewer, and the question is, do we want to get finer with that presentation? And it really depends on the interests of the participants.
Thank you.
David Engelbert?
Yeah, I guess I'd like to add, and maybe Greg, I don't think you worked for the department that long ago, but They used to work with wells with the lead arsenic from the cherry orchards. That was a real problem up in Sevastopol area. Not to cite one location, but the mixing sites for cherry orchards, some of the largest ones. And that was problems with where the cherry pits went and all of that. So Door County has dealt with problems of this type before, where you don't know if you
Yes,
want
we
to care
have.
to comment
And
on that.
yeah, a lot of that remediation was before I got here, but I've certainly have taken over that lead arsenic program. One of the things Bill did before he left, Bill Schuster, was he had an affidavit for DATCAP for all the sites that we did remediation at. So the remediation was primarily done at the mixing sites where the chemicals were mixed with water. Sometimes there was spillage or overflows of tanks. And they analyzed an area of soil in a grid, found the higher levels of lead and arsenic, and what they ended up doing was going deeper and wider, excavated all those soils out and landfilled them, and then came back in. The highway department was part of it, brought in other soils. Now, most of those mixing sites were cleaned up. There's some out there that were not, or maybe didn't participate in the program, but those really high elevated levels at those mixing sites were cleaned up. The fields, the orchards, they still have higher levels than normal, but when somebody's buying property, we certainly help them and disclose that information for them, especially the realtors.
And I believe sometimes those areas were eligible for brownfield grants.
I believe so, yeah. So, and there's one program here too, the ARPA funds, again, through the state. There's some well replacement funds out there, and I think the state, the DNR, is coming up with more and more grants for mediation. So I'm not saying it's guaranteed, but we still have a budget here too that we could use.
Thank you. Hugh?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One more question relative to looking at point sources. What's been your experience in where point sources were private on-site wastewater treatment system, or POUTS? We have a lot of septics, a lot of issues with folks running over capacity. Is that going to be another challenge relative to point source, is POUT systems, in your experience?
Yeah, another great question. The publicly operated treatment works create the sludge, which needs to be managed, and in many cases it's been used as a amendment to agricultural fields, assuming there was approval from the Department of Natural Resources, and that may be the example of the source for the PFAS in the Stella example that I mentioned to you earlier. But there are a number of POTWs here in Door County that are town level or whatever that have not yet sampled for PFAS, and their treatment technologies are not capable of yet remediating the PFAS. So, that's just something that we'll have to look at real carefully and include as part of our outreach.
I guess I'm getting at, what about compromised soil absorption fields and those sorts of things on the property itself?
Oh, private property. Okay.
Yeah.
Amount systems. Okay. They're not designed for that type of a system. It'd be interesting to see what we can find. I can tell you there's a community that we're working on in central Wisconsin and Portage County where it's an old village that has septic systems immediately upgrading from supply wells. And the next block over, there is a septic system immediately upgrading from a supply well. And it's a population of several hundred people, and the nitrates in that community are very, very elevated. So there's been some pharmaceutical analysis that have been tested in that community where caffeine and some of the intercannabinoid parameters have been found. So that's one recent example that I could be aware of, but not a lot of that work has been done in Wisconsin. So it will be interesting to see what we do find. I think the biggest part is really having separation. If there's quite a bit of separation between the septic system and the supply well, there's a much better chance that the concentrations will be reduced. But again, the depth of the well will be really important to help us evaluate if that would be a good spot for us to sample, because we want to focus on the upper aquifer, as Greg was mentioning as well.
So Thank you.
Any other questions? Alexis?
Thank you. I know I've spoke a lot. I just have a clarifying question, Mr. Chair, on the resolution. So the resolution today in front of us, in front of the board, is not specifically for this project, because we've already approved that in an earlier resolution, if that's correct. But my understanding is the resolution today is specific for the contract with GZA. Is that accurate? Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? You good? Okay. All right. No problem. Okay. Any other thing to add, Greg? We will go to the voter board. Let's pass on a vote of 20 yes, 1 no. Thank you. Let's take a quick 10-minute break. All right, we'll now back in session. Ordinances. First is report, text amendments to the Door County Comprehensive Zoning Ordinance. Dave?
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to accept the report on tax amendments to Door County Comprehensive Zoning Ordinance.
We have a motion and a second. Any questions? By voice vote, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Ordinance 2023-01, text amendments to the Door County Comprehensive Zoning Ordinance. Dave?
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to approve, to adopt amendment, to adopt ordinance number 2023-01, amendment to Door County text amendments.
Okay.
And the department head is in the back audience if there is any questions.
Okay. Would anybody like an overview of this description? Morning, Mariah.
Morning. So the first, I'd say 30 or so pages in the packet from page 59 up until about 86, right before chapter 14, are what we would consider kind of cleanup amendments. So there are a lot of references in the zoning ordinance to utilities that were written in like the early 90s, which are clearly outdated, and some of them are things that we never really have regulated or can't regulate, or that state and federal laws have changed, and so you really have no control over, you know, where maybe an electrical substation or something like that goes. So that's the bulk of what is in those chapters. We will still be required to regulate some of those things in the exclusive agriculture district in the town of Claybanks, and that's why you see a couple of different references in the text to where those are not going to be exempt from the ordinance anymore. And then the last 20 pages, which is all in red font and strike through because we're proposing deleting it, is chapter 14 of the zoning ordinance. This relates to all sorts of different communication towers, whether it's radio or broadband or mobile telecommunications, et cetera. And the history behind that is in the mid-90s, we did regulate such towers through the regular zoning ordinance, but only in the areas where the county had comprehensive zoning jurisdiction. And then in, I think, the early 2000s, we pulled out the tower regulations into a separate ordinance. I might be getting some of my chronology here wrong. And then the state and federal laws changed completely with regard to how communication towers got regulated, and that ordinance became defunct. The state set up a broadband forward initiative and some new laws in maybe like 2011. No, more like 2015. So we, at that time, then drafted a new chapter as part of the zoning ordinance, chapter 14. And even though the comprehensive zoning ordinance doesn't apply in all the towns, that chapter did because of how the statutes were set up. The exception being if a town didn't want to be part of the county regulations, they could opt out. So we've had 6 or 7 towns that almost immediately opted out of chapter 14. So in the years that we've had this chapter in effect since 2015, we've only been administering it in about half of the towns. One of the reasons that we had this chapter also was because of that Broadband Forward initiative program that I mentioned at the state level. When we got Broadband Forward certified, it was because it was going to help communities score better on grant applications when you were trying to get funding for broadband projects. As they were handing us the certification, they said, oh yeah, this isn't going to matter anymore for grants. So it doesn't matter anymore as far as whether you get grant money or not. We did double check that with the state before we brought this to the Resource Planning Committee to propose getting rid of the chapter. So the reality is that this chapter doesn't even apply in half the towns. If a town wishes to adopt its own ordinance, it can, because like I said, half a dozen of them have adopted their own. It doesn't matter anymore for state grant money. And the reality is it's not like it used to be when we had some say about where these types of towers went. These are really just kind of technical engineering standards that they follow at the state level anyway.
Questions, Mariah?
Joe? I know the island has sent down a letter pertaining to this, so for clarification for myself is, because I was approached by a few people, basically all of the rules and regulations are now gonna be regulated by the state and feds, period. County's out of it.
The county would not be regulating them at all. There's lengthy, because a lot of what's in this chapter comes from or is based on the state statutes, so there are regulations that are out there that either the Public Service Commission or whatever other entities at the state have in place. I don't know, to be honest, what level of enforcement they do with those, but to our knowledge, anytime we've gotten an application from anybody, we've never had anything that they needed to change. I mean, when it's a bigger company, they know, they wrote these rules, actually, I think, with the state. But yeah, I mean, if the island is concerned, because that was the one town that we heard from that was not happy about the chapter being deleted. I know that like Liberty Grove and Gibraltar and Nassauwappi and Jacksonport and Bailey's Harbor have all adopted their own ordinances, so I'm sure they'd be willing to share those with the town.
Bob?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, so just clarifying that basically you're deleting chapter 14 because the rules are superseded by state or federal?
Well,
basically, or?
They're not necessarily, they're duplicative, I guess would be the way to say it. It's kind of restating a lot of what's out there and what the larger companies seem to be following anyway, and half of the towns have opted out. And when someone applies to us for one of these towers, they hand us literally a binder that's this thick, that's full of engineering plans that we don't have the expertise to deal with anyway. Like I said, as best we can tell, everything that we've gone through has always complied, but it's just, it's busy work is what it feels like to staff, that all they're doing is turning in what they would have to turn in to the PSC anyway.
I guess I'm just wondering, I mean, it's a pretty big deal. I mean, it seems to me, you know, to regulating utilities, regulating communication towers, and then to just say, oh, we're not gonna do anything. Not trying to question your judgment of your job, but it strikes me as like, oh, should we like have no regulations in that field at all? I don't know. Just
You pretty much have no regulations in 6 or 7 towns right now, because the towns that have opted out have their ordinances are like a page long. They basically just require them to pay a fee and they're done. So, and like I said, there's almost nothing that we're allowed to do with regard, like the one thing I can think of is, and this will be true whether this chapter is in effect or not, we can maintain a 75-foot setback from the ordinary high water mark because the shoreline zoning standards would supersede whatever they might want to do closer than that. But there's really not a whole lot else that we can do in terms of saying where they go.
Thank you.
Joel?
Yeah, just as a follow-up. That's a good question I was gonna ask, and thank you for reminding me. So when a company, Cellcom or whoever it might be, wants to put up some sort of tower, if the county's out of the equation, they now make an application to the state, PSC or whoever it might be. Their rules and regulations are gonna dictate the engineering parameters, right? I'm assuming a fall zone or something is part of this. That's where people were asking me about that. They were concerned about that as well.
Yeah, and I don't know what level of application or review happens at the state level, but in theory, the same rules apply whether or not this chapter is in place.
Gotcha.
Vinnie?
Again, clarifying for people's questions as well, placement of cell towers is also regulated or would be by the state, and that application, like where it can be located. I know like Town of Gibraltar is trying to place one right now, and it's going through multiple steps with the DNR in other areas. So how does that process change, or does it change at all with this deletion?
Well, Gibraltar is one of the towns that's opted out, so I'm not sure what regulations they've got in place. As far as things like wetlands, that would be the only thing I could think of where the DNR might get involved, or maybe if it's near shore, those wouldn't be affected. Like our comprehensive zoning ordinance is still going to prevent somebody from putting fill. I don't know why you'd want to put a tower in a wetland because it would probably be low, but if you wanted to, we wouldn't let you because you can't put fill in a wetland and then put a tower on top of it. And then again, they would still be held to the water setback.
And any changes of setbacks to like property lines or, it's a lot to take it all in. I don't know what the rules are now. Is there anything
Again, I
different
don't know
we're
what's in
losing
place
in that?
I don't know what's in place in Gibraltar right now,
But
because,
just for the county, I'll say,
but
for the
yeah.
Gibraltar, yeah.
Yeah, generally, what we did with setbacks is what the state said that you were allowed to do, so it doesn't exceed that. This is one of those things where there's a whole list of things that have happened in the last 12 or 13 years where the state said, okay, if you're gonna regulate this thing, this is how you get to do it. And then there's not a whole lot of flexibility on top of that.
Thank you.
Anybody else? All right, no other questions. We will go to the voter board since it's an ordinance. Let's pass on a vote of 20 yes, 1 no. Thank you. We'll have our last special report of the day, Museums and Archives Project. Ken?
Sure. Steve, want to come up? So Steve and I are gonna tag team. Wayne is not with us today, but let me get one item up and share my screen so those that are online can also see. So what we'd like to do is give you an update on the museum project. Again, right now we have a resolution that already authorizes kind of the stage that we're at now and also allows us to proceed into like what we consider as full design. So while we have that, when we brought it to Highway and Facilities, they thought it is also valuable to bring the project update to the full county board. So that's why we're here today. We'd like to give you an opportunity to kind of look at the project. It's kind of just a little bit of a gut check to make sure we're still on the same page of where we're going with this project and can kind of give you an understanding of what the vision is going forward. So again, we're talking about the museum and archives. So you're looking at obviously the historic museum itself. And I'm just going to kind of walk through what the project scope is and what we're looking at. So the first one is this be the site layout. So again, it's a little bit hard to discern, so let me kind of walk you through. Again, if you recall, we own, in essence, that entire block. So if you follow my cursor, right here where my cursor is, that's the existing historic building or the existing museum. This block right here, and then the Pioneer would extend this way. So you're looking at the entire block from Michigan all the way to Louisiana, and it shows you the site plan. And what the site plan shows you is what the new footprint would be. So again, I'll walk you through it. This is what we consider the existing museum portion, the historic portion. The Pioneer would be, in essence, would be torn down. And then we would reestablish the Pioneer in its exact same location. But that would be replaced, and you see the new footprint. So the footprint obviously would extend off the back of the museum, and you'd see this additional rectangular addition being put on. Okay. Likewise, you'd also see that, if you recall, going way back, there was interest in reestablishing I guess what you call the old historic alley. And through the design work, we did establish doing that. So you'll see this actually going through as a one-way drive. And you can see the related parking related to the building itself. Again, just kind of giving you an idea of the whole site plan. And again, right now we have this identified as green space. And that would remain at green space at this point in time until this county board or a future county board decides to do something with it. So whether it's for another future county addition or a future compatible type of use, that's up for discussion. But for right now, we're going to make that green space similar to the green space that you see at the other end. So you have kind of the bookends of green space right now as it's being proposed. So let's move forward actually to the building itself. Again, I'll just enlarge this a little bit for you so you can see it, but it is in your packet. Again, for the drawings itself, it's showing you what would be considered the existing museum. Again, this purple area is the existing museum, obviously with the existing footprint of the Pioneer at this location here. In terms of when we looked at the addition, obviously there's got to be a way to, I guess, tie into the museum, into the new building itself. And that's accomplished with this corridor that extends across the front. And again, there is this a small addition to the exhibit space for the museum. But again, if you look at the whole idea of the project was again to focus on the archives, and you can see that what we consider the archives is all this area in this cyan color, okay? The areas that are in gray are just considered common areas or common spaces. Those are your welcome area, your restrooms, and this corridors. And then in this box here, that's all your mechanicals. But again, you look at the entire layout of the building as it's being proposed. I think the main idea is to pick up on this is that we are looking at changing the main entrance. So the main entrance would be at this end of the building itself. Again, this would meet all the requirements for ADA access and everything related to the building. So let me just keep on going through. There were some renderings that were put together by our architectural firm that kind of shows you what their vision is, what the building would look like. One thing that we're trying to accomplish is that the museum itself is considered a historic building. So being a historic building, that actually sets off some standards that you need to try to accomplish. The main one being is that any type of addition should be distinct. It could look, or it should have a feel that kind of matches, but it should be distinct from the existing building itself. In other words, you should be able to look at it and be able to tell that that is not part of the original building. And I think we've accomplished that, and they did a very nice job with the design. So again, what you'll see, at least from this angle, is you'll see the existing museum, and now you can see that addition going on. The main feature that ties the two buildings together, obviously, is the stonework would match between both buildings itself. But again, going to a flat roof in this type of design, a little more modern in terms of its look, but it still blends in terms of being part of the museum itself. If I would just continue down, it has just a different angle. Again, you can see that same distinct feature now standing out. The historical museum, you can see the addition of where that is. What you're seeing here now is obviously this would be the new location on this end of the building. It's covered by a canopy that's welcoming. The one thing that we thought was unique, if you recall, of our ADRC project or the community center, you're welcomed with that wooden fixture in the front. So we have that stonework in the wooden fixture that kind of welcome you into the building. That's the same concept that they tried to work with this in terms of the design. So it makes it very apparent that this is your main entrance now going forward and how that building would look. Again, there's stairs that'd be in the front, but there's also the ADA access that would get you in. The one item to point out is obviously if you're familiar with the museum, with the Pioneer, we've been involved or communicating with them throughout the process. But the fire trucks, if you recall, those actually do come out, and they do use those for various occasions. And this design actually does incorporate that. So the glass windows in the part of the front of the building would actually open, and the fire truck would still be accessible and still could be removed and used that way. So we thought that was kind of a neat design. This one gives you a little bit, I thought was a nice one, is just kind of a little bit of an aerial view. It gives you a nice perspective of the entire building itself. Again, you can see the historical museum here. Again, very distinct, and it stands out. Again, you can see how that parking works along the back. You have your bookend green spaces, your main entrance along with your ADA access. One thing that we had, I guess, extensive discussions on is obviously parking related to it. There is parking to the front. We do have parking across the front, and we worked with the city. There will be parking also provided along Michigan Street as well. In terms of the building itself, you can see there's not a lot of windows. Again, there's the main entrance or the main streetscape, which provides that feeling of being in the downtown district. But again, remember, these are archives and museum objects, so you're not actually looking for a lot of sun. You do see this design feature on the top, which provides a little bit of indirect lighting into the building, but again, no direct lighting on your stuff that you're trying to preserve. Again, this gives you another perspective of the building itself, more from the front. Again, this lower portion is trying to show you that wooden covering that would extend over the stairways a little bit, but as again, your main entrance. But again, the building itself Again, very distinct in terms of the design, but again, between the stonework, you know that it's still one structure of a common element that way. Again, the interior details have not been worked out, but again, they've put together just some visuals just to kind of get a comfort of what that space might be like. So again, if you're following my cursor, again, this is that outside portion. You can see that wooden feature actually extends into the building. I thought it was kind of a neat design element. But again, this is your interior corridor that connects your new entrance to the museum, existing museum. And then this would be your walk along that space where you have your new exhibit space and the Pioneer still at that location. And then the last attachment is just kind of showing you where we are currently projected on our budget. Again, I think so far the good news, and again, this all depends on the bidding and all the other stuff we've been through. We've been trying to work with them very hard and trying to control the numbers. But we are still expected to be in that $5.6 million mark for the building itself. We're looking at adding the final portion of the funding for the CIP in 2024. But again, you have to recall we need to remove the existing Yonkers building and do the site prep and everything related to that. So you'll see what we have is what we call the sources of funds. So we have our money that's been set aside, the 5.6. We had money that was also part of the original Yonkers building at 385, which we'll allocate. And we are planning to budget some additional KIP in 2024 to finish off the funding. So from that standpoint, we're on target of what we had projected in terms of everything coming in. In terms of what we consider the uses of the funds, you can see that below. Obviously, there's the architectural services, the construction. We have a contingency amount built in there, again at 10%. And historically, knock on wood, we've been under budget for those, so that's, I guess, but we like to be transparent in terms of the budgeting. The one thing that we have done is there obviously would be existing maintenance to the existing facility. You can see that it's at 150. So in other words, we need to still upgrade the systems for the existing museum and probably do some of the TLC that's been deferred. But we have that included within the budget itself. It doesn't make sense to do a brand new building and then shut down the museum another portion of time to get it brought up to spec. So we're going to do it all as one project. You can see the demo listed at 300,000. I think that's also high, but again, we're trying to be on the high end of our estimating, and then just some other final numbers for that. So overall, that's kind of where we are with the project. I think right now we're in a very good spot, both financially for the project, but again, where we are right now is that Highway and Facilities, I guess, in essence, approved these designs for the building, and really what we're looking for is the green light to say, okay, we're going to go to actually architectural documents. So in other words, once we do this, besides some minor tweaks or something like that, we're really not going to change walls or building location or anything related to that, because that's where it gets costly. So traditionally the process would be is we green light them, they would go through those design documents and they would go out to bid. Once we have those bids back, that would be the final checkpoint for the county board. So we do all the construction documents, those go out for bid, we get the bids back. The Highway and Facilities would review those bids, recommend who to select, and then that whole package comes back to the county board for the green light to go. So again, this is, I guess we're calling it like a mid check-in point, just because we wanted to make sure that the full county board understands where we're at and that they're comfortable with the project itself. So Steve, did I miss anything?
I think that was pretty comprehensive. Just to sum it up, really what you're looking at here is a comprehensive local history center that addresses virtually every need, issue, and deferred piece of maintenance that you've heard about with the museum and the archives for the last 10 plus years. This is a facility that would be extremely innovative. From the archives perspective, we would have an archives facility that you would not find outside of major universities, which would set us up for 30 to 50 years of intensive archives work. It addresses the museum's needs, and it does so in a way that is appealing and comprehensible to the public, and that the public will support, and sets us up for the future.
Questions? Dan? I'm sorry, David.
Okay.
I was looking at the wrong picture.
I don't want to be the new Dan. But anyway, when we, 5, 6 years ago, when we initiated some of the discussion on the archives, they reached out to the different municipalities to see if they could had interest in sharing in that space. Is that still part of this plan, or has that been dropped?
100%. We have no formal agreements with other municipalities, independent groups, and so forth. But as you all know now, we have extensive archival holdings around the county, both discovered and undiscovered.
Mhm.
And informally, I have heard, rumors, we can say, that there are groups with smaller collections that would be interested in doing mass donations or something of that nature if this facility
So
existed.
now that we're at
Right.
farther along in our planning stage, I guess I'd like to see that they're maybe interested if that space is available.
Absolutely.
And also then, is there sufficient storage planned for the museum so that they can rotate their exhibits and so forth? That was another.
Absolutely. Yes, that's a huge priority for us. We knew we were building climate-controlled storage for the archives, so there is a museum component to that as well. Getting the museum's collection out of the basement is a high priority for us. It will be accessible for the entire facility now, not having to go up the stairs.
And one final question. The green space along Louisiana Street, approximately what size is that? I like it staying a green space. I mean, I think that's a good aspect of this design. But nothing shows dimensions that I was able to
Yeah, I
read.
don't have the dimensions with me, but I'm thinking it's 75 feet across the front.
Okay.
Or a little
Yeah,
less.
looking at 5 parking spaces plus some more on the back, I estimated close to that. Mhm.
Correct.
Vinnie?
Thank you. This is an exciting project, and I was wondering, it seems like the blue or the purple areas are display areas, and then the blue are program and or office and prep areas. And this is new, so I don't know if you have an answer to this, but as far as like public use of the space, where do you see that happening? Would that be in the program? Is it public programs? And I'm not judging how much blue space there is, but there's a lot of blue space. And so just how is, like, would you see other organizations being able to use the space? Or, and then my other part of that question, and I don't know enough about this and I apologize, but how are we with staffing? Like, this is a quadrupling of the programming and display space. Do we have adequate staff to be able to meet all of those needs? And should we just anticipate it for the future?
Sure, I'll take that in order. First, fabulous question. So because the blue space kind of all feels back of house, it is not all back of house. For instance, the public programming space that you see in the front, this was a core need and has been for many years now. We absolutely envision that space being used by other groups, not just us. It's really a resource for the entire Door County historical community and really any group that's history adjacent. By the same token, the Archives Research Room is absolutely a public space. That would be open to the public at any time that the facility is open for research purposes. This is something that we have never had in the past.
And I'm hovering over those areas. So this is this would be like the public conference room, training room. That could be dual purpose for both the archives and for the museum and other historical groups. And then when you say in the back house of the research, that's this room and this room, correct?
Certainly. And of course, if we're doing an intensive collaboration with another entity, those other spaces might be opened up as well. They may in fact be using the stacks, they may be using our prep room, things of that nature. That's really kind of what we're hoping to do, is to create these spaces that will enable these future collaborations and try to vision how it could be used in the future, not just how it could be used immediately. On the staffing discussion, I'm confident that our staff right now is able to staff this facility adequately. We do, however, want to build in future room for an enhanced volunteer corps and the possibility of persistent internships going on throughout the year. We feel that this is a really attractive target for folks in a variety of fields who are looking for practical experience in a welcoming environment, and we want to bring them in.
Nissa?
Okay, thank you. So we already discussed this at the library board meeting, so this is an easy question for you, Stephen, but most of the county board isn't on that committee. Can you tell people a little bit about the picture on the glass in front?
Certainly, and this is a good opportunity, thank you, Nissa, to address the fire station.
Totally giving you a good leading question.
Thank you for lobbing that one to me. As we know, as you can see from these designs, by far the most dramatic change that's happening here as far as the overall look of the building is the removal of the simulated fire station that is currently there. So this is a major change. Obviously, the fire trucks themselves and the fire station display are not going away, and we've been working with Pioneer Fire Company across the street from the very beginning of this project, because they do in fact own those trucks, to make them aware that we have no interest in taking away that component of firefighting history. It's one of our most important and beloved exhibits that we have at the museum. However, it also is an area that we feel could be improved, and is probably the area in need of greatest improvement, I think, in our museum in terms of both the exhibits and the quality of them, and also the overall building. However, we know that historic, simulated historic facade is something that has been there for many years, and is something that has community affection as well. So we want to make sure that when we make this change, that we're honoring that and finding a way to represent that facade in a way in this new building. And if you look at your rendering, and again, this is just a draft, so it may not look exactly this way, on page 151, you can see that, again, we're glass fronting that new fire station display. And if you see in that first image, what our architects did for us, which I think is a really innovative solution to this problem, is that they've actually etched into the glass itself the image of the actual historic fire station. As you may know, the fire station that we have is not what the actual historic fire station looked like when it was across the street where the post office parking lot is now. This is an image of the actual historic town hall and fire station that was there. So really, as you're walking down that corridor, you're looking through, you can imagine seeing the red fire trucks, the chrome through that glass. You're actually seeing the lived history of that fire station represented there. And I thought that was a really innovative and modern approach to doing something of the same thing. So anytime we make a change in history, we understand that, it's something we have to take very seriously, because people have legitimate attachment to these things. But I feel that moving in this direction is a way to really have it both ways and have a really good solution to that problem.
Claire?
So exciting, wonderful project. I'm looking at page 149 and that rendering. The green space that's on the left of the building, will there be plans for that to be actually used as a green space? Maybe some landscaping and tables and chairs, or for people to, because right now it doesn't look accessible at all, because there's, with the ramp, looks like there's boulders or something there. It doesn't look like it's usable.
So the initial intent, as you can see here, that's, what you see here is part of the switchback for the AD access, and then we have, those aren't boulders, those are supposed to be landscaping.
Oh, forgive me. Okay.
In this portion here. And for right now, what we have is this, we have it just being slated as green space. Again, until we know if we want to enhance that for additional outdoor programming space or something like that, that'd be done in the future. But for right now, it's just being left as green space. In other words, it'd be probably a grass type feature. We'll have, I guess, the trees planted along that corridor. But as of right now, no additional, I guess, resources are being allocated to that portion.
I see. And then I had one other question. Looking at these huge blank roofs, is there any thought of rooftop solar?
We haven't had that discussion
Not
yet.
yet. That's
I think that's a possibility in this next stage that we're in, and looking at kind of what the environmental impact is. But we really haven't crossed that bridge yet.
Okay, thank you.
So one of the things that, as part of the requirement with that, is we're looking at, we're not going LEED, because LEED has what they call LEED certified building. Again, that puts us into a different cost category, but what we're trying to work with them on is being almost like LEED compliant. In other words, we're not going to go through the process of applying for LEED certification, but we would go through the evaluation to make sure that everything that we're doing is, I guess, as affordable in terms of trying to be as sustainable as possible with the building design itself. So we will look at the addition of as a solar option for that, but just in terms of the building materials, insulation, and our heating and cooling systems and stuff like that, we'll be looking at all those types of things. The one thing is a little bit different with this one is that obviously with the materials that we're storing, it does require, I guess, a little bit more, I'm not trying to say commercial grade in terms of quality, in terms of maintaining the temperatures and the conditions as far as humidity control. So that puts us in a little bit different category in terms of some of those traditional systems we can look at, but that'll be part of our process in going to this next phase is in terms of how do we make this building as sustainable as possible.
Vinnie?
Again, I really like the museum, so I wish I knew more, but are the hours changing? Is it open year round? Is it open on the weekends? Is it, like, what's the accessibility with this kind of new, exciting space?
Right, so, the great question. Obviously, and historically, the museum has been open 7 days a week for the summer season, the traditional Door County summer season from May through October. With this expansion, we will be looking at changing that. I think that, given, and this is a process that will happen that you will all see, and this is very preliminary. But with the nature of this facility, the fact that the archives, which is a year-round institution, will be incorporated into the overall facility, and based on a need that I think we've had for many years now at the museum, we will be looking to take the museum to a year-round institution as well. Not with, I think 7 days a week is unsustainable with our current staffing or with any reasonable staffing model that we would have, but certainly with accessibility throughout the year. We want to be available to schools. We want to be available to many of the institutions that really just can't get to us in the summer.
Thank you. Another part of that question is, are the library archives moving into there and that frees some space in the library, or is that a completely separate archival research room?
At this point, there's been no discussions of moving the Lori History Room into this facility. I can't really comment on it beyond that.
Okay, I don't know what the committee's talked about, so thank you. And I guess I just also would like to see if we can do some kind of green roof or solar or something in addition to the LEED, as a part of that, not official certification, but just looking at flat roofs and the ability to do something sustainable on them. Thank you.
Dave?
Thank you. If you want to go to page 152 for me. Now, the new entryway is coming in through the new building, correct?
Yes, correct.
So, as individuals walk through those doors numerous times, what's going to happen to that so it mitigates its look, act, and feel of being an entryway?
So there are some options with that. Obviously, there's an X factor too, because we have some very significant historic stained glass incorporated into that entranceway. So discussion about that is kind of what's going to happen in the next step. There's really two options for us, I think, that we've looked at. One is maintaining that as some form of emergency exit.
Which is probably going to be required
Yeah.
code-wise, but
Yeah,
I'm just to mitigate the general public from thinking that's the way we walk into.
Right. Certain things like, for instance, the open signs, things like that will definitely be removed. The other possibility, and this depends upon many other factors, is removing the entrance entirely, leaving the stained glass where it is, and incorporating that into an overall kind of solid structure and having an emergency exit elsewhere. But that is obviously a much larger ask. We've been looking at remediating our stained glass, and what we've heard from vendors is that really, as long as they remain doors, they're going to be in a tenuous state, because that's not an ideal situation for them. So this is going to be part of that next part of this project that we look at.
So at the moment, the change of it visually is not, it's a coming project.
Right, it's a
As
coming
it
project.
moves forward, it'll be decided.
We are not looking at making any substantial changes visually to this facade, again, for the same reason that we're trying to not touch the historic building too much. And it is as iconic to us as any part of anything we do. But yes, we'll definitely be looking at ways to try to shepherd people in the direction that we want them to go. And I feel like that wooden feature that you saw, that canopy, that was one of the deciding factors that led us to go in that direction, is that it really kind of very literally points people to the new entrance, and makes that more visually appealing.
Next question, the building is rather full.
It is.
So with the new addition, what's the plans for the freed up space?
There are many plans for the freed up space. Freeing up space in general at this point for us is just a benefit in its own right. We are packed too tight. I think virtually all of our exhibits could use a walkthrough and to be loosened up a little bit less material. We have several plans for the new freed up space. I can give you some hypotheticals. we really want to redo our approach to the Peshtigo fire, which is, I think, quite inadequate to the scale of the event. That new exhibit space is a huge target for that. We also want to improve our military section dramatically. We are currently in the 80th anniversary of the Second World War, and we want to, before that anniversary passes, do a comprehensive exhibit on the home front experience. What we envision really for that space is it allows us to have more of those temporary rotating exhibits. They may be 1 year, they may be 5 years, they may be visiting exhibits in the future, but historically, as you know, we haven't had the room to do that. This would give us that.
Then the last question. Through the years, we've seen different renditions. One of them was a variation of potential housing and connected that, and just a wide variety of things. I, too, would prefer that this block of land never change hands, that it stay as county-owned and not county-operated property with no partnerships of any other purpose. I'd tolerate the idea of doing some other needed government activity, Door County government activity, but ultimately I'd rather see it stay as a block of land related to the history. Thank you.
Bob?
I have a question about the mechanics. So will with a new build, will say the furnace room from the old museum be replaced, or will there still be two separate, electrical, or like HVAC and like heating systems?
You're pushing me slightly into Wayne's territory, but yes, I can tell you that the current HVAC and furnace systems in the museum are highly inefficient. We have multiple furnaces, and it's a really kind of a cobbled together system. Yes, it will be centralized to the greatest extent possible.
Okay, that makes sense. And then I was curious, just following up a couple other comments on following up on other people's comments. So looking at the drawing along Louisiana Street, there currently shows no windows or doors on that side. It looks like just a blank wall. Is that accurate, or are we just not at that level of detail yet?
That is correct at this point. We are looking at zero lot line for that, so that necessitates us to keep away from the windows, essentially.
Okay. And zero lot line for what reason?
So if you, again, it's part of the central business district of if you look at the city comp plan, so if you would put a building there, they consider that zero lot lines. So if we would put up another county facility, you would abut it right against that wall.
Mm-hmm.
So again, and if you look at the design of what's in that section, they're trying to make the uses compatible to where you would not have windows in that
Right.
section at all. So if anything, if you wanted to soften that up, we could do landscaping or something related. I mean, if we didn't do something for multiple years, you'd soften up that wall with some type of landscaping or things like that. That would not, and then if you ever did something, the landscape would get moved or something like that. But you could
Sure.
definitely soften up that wall.
Sure, and I guess I'm actually thinking, just in the moment, thinking of it from the inside, like, there's a couple of office rooms, conference area, like office space, like, I think those people should have windows. So if those windows get blocked up later, they get blocked up later, but absent a plan for what's happening next door on that green space, I think there should be windows. There should be windows and maybe even a door, so people can leave their office and go sit on a patio outside or whatever, enjoy the landscaping or whatever. Just a thought. Because again, like absent a plan, sure, that could, I get that maybe eventually we would build up right up against that, but like, when's that gonna happen? Not tomorrow. Anyway, what else? Oh yeah, and then just a shout out to look at rooftop solar. We've got new incentives coming through the federal government. Payback on solar is like 7 years. Whatever we pay up front, we're making money in the end. And that goes with whether we actually go for and attain LEED certification or whatever level of net zero impact we do. Yeah, it's going to raise our bill in the beginning, but that means in 5, 10, 15, whenever the payoff is, whenever we hit that magic mark, then it's all in the black. And I just really think we need to be looking at that kind of, this is the county, like was mentioned too. This should be a block for the county historical district or whatever we want to call it in perpetuity. So we're not building something that we think might go away in 20 years. We should be absolutely pursuing LEED certification or whatever level of net zero we can, even if it means $1 million or whatever more up front. within 10 years, it's going to have paid for itself. Thank you.
Dave?
Sorry. Sorry. I'm getting there. Lost my mouse. Gotcha.
Sorry, but you used a trigger word for me. The zero lot line is a big deal if it's used in an architectural world. Why did you choose to use that word?
Again, because potentially that site could be, again, used for, well, depending on whatever the future county board wants to do, it could be used for another facility or an addition or something related to it.
Yeah, you never would use the word zero lot line during that. It's common to divide buildings up in separate sections for various reasons. We don't normally use zero lot line during that activity on construction, so that was a trigger word for me.
Well, again, if zero lot line is part of the central business core, so example, when you have a building here, they have zero lot line, so the buildings can abut one another.
Right, but that's separate ownership. In this case, we can just build, this concept of building for extension is not unusual.
Yep.
But it's never used in the architectural world as a zero lot line. It's just a natural fire barrier. It's required by certain volumes and stuff like that. So when you use the word zero lot line, it makes me wonder where the lot line is and why you're building to that definition.
Well, okay, formally, there's no lot line.
That's what I was
It's not
wondering.
established, so again, it's up for us to determine what we want to do with it.
Well, that makes me nervous. Now, the other thing in reference to PV, in Door County, we have two power utilities. One of them is WPS, the other one is Sturgeon Bay Utilities. Most of you know I have a fair amount of renewable energy. And Sturgeon Bay Utility, WPPI districts are one of the best places to place and get a return on investment. WPS is difficult. But, you know, if we can find the money, I'm absolutely in favor of increasing our solar-based, in this case, electrical offset.
Okay. Duly noted.
Bud?
Yes, could you tell me the reason for putting those rocks or boulders around that one area there?
These are bushes right here. So the rendering's not very good, but these are just bushes.
Right. But on the other side?
Right here?
Oh. No, no.
Oh, these right here, this would be a rendering of where the fire trucks would be pulling out?
No, go back to where you were. You got bushes there. Okay, what's around the corner? What's that?
Those are all bushes.
Oh, it looked like rocks. Okay.
Again, this is your switchback for your ADA access coming into the building.
Looked
So
like
they're
boulders.
softening it out with bushes.
Okay, it looked like boulders to me.
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Vinnie?
The taste of the landscaping, but I would like to see added to the budget a line item for landscaping, because if we just have grass up to buildings without windows, it's just not gonna look great. And if we're investing $5.6 million, let's have a landscape plan that maybe incorporates some history exhibits. Even if it's not on that side that could someday be built, there's the other side, there's the front. Just including some of that in the budget would be great. So I know this is the first visual and it's all about like how the digital bushes or rocks show up, but just in the actual budget, if we can have whatever amount we can come up with for a design for some historical exhibit / plantings, I think it would improve the look of the whole building. So thank you.
Okay, last question on this particular project at the moment. Claire?
Sorry. Okay, yes, to reiterate, as long as we're talking about this little green space, I would agree with Supervisor Boltman. I thought that was archival space along that blank wall. If those are offices and there's no windows or doors, yeah, I would feel sorry for anybody having to spend time in there. So I would very much like to see some sort of access.
I think the only office there that's for an individual is mine, so I
Oh,
appreciate
okay.
the, I appreciate the
Well,
sentiment.
Yes, especially that. But yeah,
I appreciate the sentiment.
In the other drawing, it looked as though that whole line was offices. So yes, thank you very
David?
much.
Yeah, you mentioned making the Peshtigo Fire a larger part of this display, and certainly that's a very significant part of my area.
Certainly.
I hope we could recognize what the Belgian Heritage Center and the Champion Shrine are doing in that regard too, so we can coordinate and
100%.
work and not necessarily duplicate, but certainly do the best we can to
Yeah, we're certainly
work
closer to them than even to most of our historical partners, because we have multiple staff members who are longtime museum supporters who are now working with them. So we work with them on an almost monthly basis, and absolutely, we would do that.
All right, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Do you want to explain this? So before we bring this down to adjournment, and we have another little project in here that you've all been notified of, I don't know if you remember it, but Ken?
Sure, so the knock is here. If you recall, we mentioned that last month, but they would like to see some pictures of us looking like we're working, like we are right now. So as we finish up the meeting, you're just gonna hear some clicking going on. So we're just gonna kind of go through the rest of the agenda, and we're gonna go through some clicking, and then before you would leave, she'd ask that you just stay, and she's just gonna go really quick down the row and get your individual pictures if you're willing to. They'd appreciate that very much. So David, why don't you walk us through the rest of the agenda, and then we'll finish that way.
Okay. Are any oral committee reports from anybody? None. Any review of committee minutes?
Yeah, go ahead.
Review of vouchers, claims, and bills? Suddenly everybody's quiet. Announcements. The next county board meeting is Tuesday, June 27th at 9 a.m. If there's no further business to conduct, a motion to adjourn would be in order. We have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.